Welcome back, folks. We got a good one tonight. This has been a long time coming. We have a mystery on our hands that some folks are aware of and trying to solve, but not enough folks are. And this gets at the heart of an era that we understand so very little, and that's the mid-90s. And the big mystery is, why do we see Samuel Daniel in Shakespeare and vice versa? Is that any good?
Hmm?
Okay. All right. Just gotta get my game. All right. Yeah. You want to start off?
Yeah, I'll start off.
Okay.
All right. And welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Apocalypsis Historia with Brady and Chance as your lead hosts here today. And as Chance led it off, we're going to be talking about, the presence of Samuel Daniel in Shakespeare. And just a quick, acknowledgement to all of our Patreon supporters who make this endeavor possible. Supply Chance with his JSTOR access and coffee or whatever sort of stimulant he uses to constantly pour through all this stuff and
soda pop.
There you go. Thanks again to everyone who is sub to our Patreon, and Chance is dropping some good stuff over in the Discord. So if you ever want pretty much permanent access, just sign up one time or come stick around, come to help us out. But without further ado, what do we have here with this sort of Samuel Daniel pitch? And so, even with the sort of layman pitch maybe first, to maybe sort of guide the conversation, let alone, the even deeper stuff that we're going to talk about here. Basic summary. We've talked about Samuel Daniel on another episode before, but maybe if you just give us a quick rundown about how you want to start that off.
So let's real quickly go through basically who Samuel Daniel is for you folks that are like, Samuel Daniel, that's two first names. It is two first names. We have a video on it, and that was an early video. A lot of that's super interesting and suggestive. I don't know that it's any of that's conclusive, and we haven't really followed up too much on the whole Samuel Daniel, Philip Sidney phenomenon. But this is almost like a prequel to that video, because this is kind of what led me down the rabbit hole to say I need to look at Samuel Daniel. I came across an essay, and this was came across it probably not too long after it came out, because this is from 2020, summer 2020. So go back to the height of the COVID paranoia, and the rest of us are freaking out, locked in our houses. A man named David S. Weiss is doing the Lord's work, because he wrote an essay called "Did Shakespeare Use a Manuscript of Samuel Daniel's Civil Wars to Write Richard II?" So, real quick, Samuel Daniel is a poet. He's almost like a poet laureate figure. He pops up in the 90s, and he becomes kind of a bigger name and bigger presence in the poetry and even sort of theater scene, courtly scene, up into the 1600s, because he gets rather patronized by Queen Anne. She seems to take a good liking to Samuel Daniel, but Samuel Daniel is supposed to have come up through the Sidney household, and then from there goes to the Herbert household in the early 90s to maybe be the tutors of William and Philip Herbert, the sons of Mary Sidney. Maybe had some other ones, but from there he goes and he lives with Robert Devereux for a little bit, and then he goes and he lives with Charles Mountjoy for a good while, and then after Mountjoy dies, he goes and gets his own place, and then he goes and retires off in a cottage and quietly dies circa 1616, which is kind of right around when people start putting these folio things together, especially Ben Jonson's, and so maybe there's some linking there. And I want to say that that's also right when Shakespeare's dying, and I may have that date not exactly right, but it's somewhere in the 16 teens, maybe 1612, something like that, which is right when Shakespeare stops writing. So what is this carryover between Daniel and Shakespeare? Because Daniel's a big-time poet, but he's not really a dramatic writer. He has a couple plays, but they're considered closet dramas. They're meant to be read or, you know, almost read aloud in like somebody's house or something. And those closet dramas usually very closely or stringently follow more classical dramatic rules like Aristotelian unity. And so that stuff's not really meant for the theater. He's supposed to be not really about the theater, though he is. He's not master of revels, but he's one of the head censors of the plays in circa 1605, I want to say, because he's part of that whole Eastward Ho kind of stuff, and he gets called into the Privy Council, and that's a whole big deal. We won't go too much into that today, because what we're going to look at is specifically Richard II. We could go into other mid-90s plays like Romeo and Juliet, or I'm sorry, I'm blanking. Maybe even Love's Labour's Lost, and then maybe even a little later with Measure for Measure. But mostly the most obvious one, I think, for everybody, because it's the first one that's really been totally spotted, is Richard II. Richard II reads like Samuel Daniel. For you folks that haven't read enough Samuel Daniel, go read his Delia sonnets. Go read his epic poems, his Civil Wars. It reads a lot like how Richard talks. Richard's a little brainier, a little wittier. He's a little more off the cuff, but it's like Samuel Daniel being off the cuff. You know, Samuel Daniel's famously called sober-minded Daniel or sober Daniel, and I think Richard II is just Daniel, but not quite so sober. So let's get into this essay real quick. Any lingering thoughts or questions like that we should kind of bring up with Samuel Daniel, because I know that was a real rough and ready summary, but any other thoughts on it? I guess there were a few things on there going through it. There's a significant number of parallels between his complaint of Rosamund and the rape of Lucrece, Rosamund and Romeo and Juliet. We have the first four books of the Civil Wars and Richard II. That one's like crazy obvious. But then there's some other connections between the Henry IV plays, even the Henry V and even Henry VI plays. You have Samuel Daniel writes Tragedy of Cleopatra, and then we have Antony and Cleopatra. We have Musophilus and Julius Caesar. So there's clearly some connection. For all you folks out there that actually think Shakespeare, thanks for watching us. Like, that's real generous of you. That's awesome. Keep watching us, because we're diving into actual academics. Like, we're not just coming up here with our crazy crank internet theories. Like, we'll tell you our crazy crank internet theories while and after we read, but we're still pointing out like really cool, cutting edge, kind of mysterious questions that have either just popped up or that we're trying to bring up and say people are overlooking, and it needs to be the new big cutting edge thing. But there's no real answer for this in the current understanding of Shakespeare's biography. There's like nothing. People maybe try to say through Henry Wriothesley, because Daniel's buddies with Florio, and Florio's supposed to be Henry Wriothesley's tutor, circa when Shakespeare is writing Venus and Adonis for Wriothesley. And so, maybe that's how they meet, because they're all three real literary minded who all write exactly like each other in many ways, and like, it's already kind of just super suspect to me, circumspect even. Like, I don't.
It just always ends up in that same sort of territory where there's a lot of probably haves and probably could haves, you know, just like when they're trying to get people like Spencer and Sidney in the same room. It's like, well, they would have been there at the same time, so they must have done it because the style and like their philosophy and like their motives all just seem too aligned to not have them together and somehow. That's a fair. And Lester's always in there too, make sure that he's always, of course, like the other one always mentioned around this stuff too. Regardless, yeah, it's just that we're in some of the same red flags here that maybe if you follow our line of thoughts with those other characters, then this is also sort of that same sort of vibe here, right?
Right, because this is a lot. Like, did we pull that up for the folks? Like, just scroll through the simple wiki page. Like,
yeah, we were looking at this.
Yeah, this is a lot. This is all Daniel's influence on Shakespeare, and then wait a second, it goes the other way. Like, and so, what way are we having this much carryover? This is a lot, guys. This is like they live together or something. Like, this is crazy. Let's see. Personal Relationship, an essay by Albert Hawthorne in 1899, reported that during his retirement, Daniel, quote, received his friends, among them Shakespeare, Chapman, Marlowe of the Mighty Line, Drayton, and Johnson. I don't need to read the next line. Did you see what was wrong with that quote? The facts that Marlowe had died in 1593, many years before Daniel's retirement, that Daniel had an acrimonious relationship with Johnson, cast doubt on the comment as a whole. And
then the next one is a Weiss quote.
Okay, here we go.
If that's even true.
Okay, so yeah,
just like as you said, yeah.
And Weiss is the guy that's writing this essay, guys. So the little bit of actual decent information, but even that is, like Brady said, they likely shared. A lot of probably here. A lot of probably. And so
could haves, must haves, probably did.
Right. And that's where I think the rubber meets the road with the issue with academia right now. David Weiss is fantastically good at what he does, but he and everybody else have to make these little presumptive comments to sort of justify what they're saying and say, like, look, Shakespeare, he's a real guy. They probably shared these acquaintances. Which part of the probably is it? Is it that Samuel Daniel didn't know these people, or is it that Shakespeare didn't know these people, or is it that both? Like, because when you say they likely shared, either they did or they didn't. Like, we're not saying that they all three got in the same room, but if Samuel Daniel knows another guy, he knows another guy. And if Shakespeare knows another guy that's the same guy, he knows the other guy that's the same guy. Like, it's either they did or didn't know each other.
And always super convenient how Shakespeare always just happens to be a ghost in trying to trace any of these interactions, Because sometimes, you can get some letters or dedications from some of those guys to one another. But in this case, it's like we still don't really have anything to be like, hey man, it was good seeing you the night at the theater.
Yeah.
Drop philosophical point here or nuggetry there, or other commonplace, contemporary event happening, or
and
anything else, or some more dedications to kind of pull that line thread to figure out where their headspace is, and where their lines are in the factions, and yada yada yada.
Like, that would be fantastic if we had any actual first-hand credible documents, but at some point, I would even want, what we get for the university wits guys, which aren't really credible, and it's definitely copy, but, what you see in Mirrors when they're talking about Nash or Green or Marlowe, where's that commentary on Shakespeare? What's his lifestyle? We don't get that commentary. We just get this, grandiose name that's just, you put whatever imagination thing you want on it, but Marlowe is a dirty atheist, and Thomas Nash, he's a wild guy, and Robert Greene had an alcohol problem, and that's not funny. We need to talk about his fish and alcohol addictions, and but Shakespeare, honey, sweet sugared lines, best in comedy and tragedy.
Wait,
and
what was that recipe again?
Poetry. Write this down.
Yeah, tequila, and what was the ratio to limes?
So, that said, let's go ahead and dive into this essay. It's a long one, so we're going to have to skim through. But,
we're starting with the Weiss one?
Yes, we'll try and guide it. And we have two other essays that are completely supplementary at this point because they're both theses, they're 100 pages. This one I got is called The Second Earl of Essex and the History Players, the Factional Writing of John Hayward, William Shakespeare, Samuel Daniel, and George Chapman. And it's less about tracing the direct connection between Daniel and Shakespeare, and more maybe that they're both part of this Essex faction, which is fantastic readings into the plays, but as far as like biographical information that supports that, like I've read this, there's not that much, but it does have a whole bunch of great political readings into the plays that I think Matthew Brand Davies is pretty much right on a lot of this stuff, that like so many of these plays, and you could lump in Johnson in here too, honestly, that this stuff seems to be all making commentary on the Essex faction, mid-90s up through the early 1600s. But the other big one we got, which is even bigger, is David Weiss's own thesis that he wrote before this essay. But this essay is like condensing it to specifically manuscripts of Daniel, whereas this is just going over the whole phenomenon of Shakespeare and Daniel, like we saw on that wiki page, which I'm absolutely certain everything on that wiki page comes from this essay. So, like I said, David Weiss is absolutely doing the Lord's work.
Just the Lord Chamberlain's work.
But maybe some of us need to start supplementing that and going along with that and asking the questions that he can't ask. Like, is maybe Samuel Daniel not Samuel Daniel, or is maybe Shakespeare not Shakespeare? Could that possibly explain some of these relationships? So, let's see. Let's start with the abstract here, the very start. Other essay.
Which one? This one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Evidence indicates that Shakespeare may have used a scribal version of Samuel Daniel's The Civil Wars rather than the first printed edition. So if he has manuscript copy, that's like an original demo version. That's something that Samuel Daniel has to hand out, and there's probably not too many getting passed around, if like any. Just that's a big long manuscript to have to copy just to circulate manuscript, something that you're going to print just a few months later. But when it is printed just a little bit later, stuff's changed, and we'll see that in a second here. So it to me suggests that whoever Shakespeare is, and whoever the author of Richard II is, has a very close proximity and a very good access to the stuff Daniel is thinking and writing about, if not being Daniel himself, because that would give him the most access. Okay. There are two extant manuscripts of portions of Daniel's epic poem. A never printed stanza in one manuscript employs imagery similar to Shakespeare's to describe the same invented episode. To investigate possible influence, this essay assesses the dates of the manuscripts, analyzes variants from the printed edition, evaluates the shared imagery, and considers how Shakespeare's possible use of a manuscript impacts the dating of Richard II. So David Weiss is, at the end of the day, he's not really too worried about authorship. Like, that's not an issue for him. Like, Samuel Daniel, Shakespeare. So he's not going to go too hard into who wrote each little line in each little thing. But he's, at some point, trying to get the earliest possible date for Richard II to better understand the Shakespeare timeline, which is definitely a worthy cause. Okay. It also identifies social connections between the authors that explain how the playwright could have obtained access to early version of the poet's work. This part I will skim through because there's not much. But that's at the end. Okay, so Shakespeare scholars generally agree that the playwright used Samuel Daniel's Civil Wars as a source for Richard II. Critical editions of Richard II cite the 1595 publication of the initial installment of Daniel's epic poem, The Civil Wars, as determining the earliest possible date of the play, implying that Shakespeare referred to the first printed edition of Daniel's work while writing Richard II. But available evidence is missing from this analysis, evidence that has never been considered in dating Shakespeare's play and assessing its relationship to Daniel's poem. There are two manuscript sections, as we said, raising the possibility that Shakespeare read a manuscript and not just the printed edition, so that this could be earlier. And, it's not for us. It's not just about dating, right? Like that changes things. Like it's one thing for Shakespeare to go pick up a book at the bookstore or see somebody that has the book and oh, that's the new hot poem. Let me check it out. Oh, I'm gonna steal that. That's cool. We don't need any sort of personal relationship or even really personal knowledge of each other. But if it's a manuscript, then that changes things. This has to be a socially knit circular network. Maybe they don't have to directly know each other. Maybe it can get passed along, but like that is definitely a whole different conversation. And up till David Weiss has brought this up very recently, like nobody's had much of a guess on this. They've just said, Shakespeare, was reading Daniel's books. No issue, no problem. But as I said, and we're not going to touch on it too much, but in his whole thesis, it's not just Richard II, guys. So this isn't just like, oh, he got passed along a manuscript. Like, this is a close-knit social thing. Okay. One of the most memorable images in Richard II is the description of the captive king being disregarded as if he were a tedious actor on the stage of the London streets, which kind of bizarre for someone like Samuel Daniel, who seemingly doesn't write plays, to go out of his way to make a theater metaphor. The theater metaphor seems appropriate to have been invented by the actor-playwright Shakespeare, but Daniel, the courtly poet, includes similar imagery in a stanza describing the same event, a stanza that appears only in manuscript version of the first two books of the Civil Wars. Daniel states that no respective eye would once vouchsafe to look upon Richard, who received not the least applause on the stage unto this wicked act. Is the shared use of the theater imagery a coincidence, or did Shakespeare get inspiration from a preprint publication, a scribal version of Daniel's poem? To investigate that question, I provide evidence of the dates of the extant manuscripts, analyze variance between them and the printed edition, evaluate the literary overlap with Shakespeare, and consider how the playwright's possible use of manuscript impacts the dating of Richard II. And he should also say authorship of Richard II, but he doesn't. I also identify social connections between Shakespeare and Daniel, bloody. Next. Okay. He goes on, talks about the manuscripts and where they come from, and so also you can skip to page 238. You can go to the next page, yeah. And at the top it says, the care taken in the preparation of manuscript 1 and 2 indicates that it was intended for some form of circulation and suggests that it may have been a presentation manuscript for a potential patron, such as Charles Blount, Baron Mountjoy, the man who encouraged Daniel's efforts in composing the Civil Wars. And so, yeah, we said earlier that Daniel is with Mountjoy. So if he's writing this big Civil War thing, he's just some broke poet. He's got to get some help for that. He's got to get patronage. So he must be writing for Mountjoy. And all that would make sense. And it doesn't necessarily have to just be some broke dude named Samuel Daniel. Like Mary Sidney or Francis Bacon acting like Samuel Daniel could still be doing all the same exact stuff. This all still, holds up. Or Philip Sidney. Manuscript 3 is not as carefully prepared. Although two other scholars note that Manuscript 3 is in a conventional Elizabethan secretary hand that is too neat and careful to suggest the poem was copied as an entry into a commonplace book, this implies a greater level of care than appears upon inspection. While the hand is generally neat and careful, the spacing and ruling of lines is often careless, and the right margin is breached many times on most pages. Unlike Manuscript 1 and 2, there is no standardization of the number of lines or stanzas on pages in Manuscript 3, and the page breaks often occur within stanzas. So we can see Manuscript 3 is not this real pretty, put it on the fireplace mantle shelf to show off to all, your yuppie dinner party friends. This is just putting it down on paper. Let's see. We can skip ahead a little bit to the next page. There's a line here. It says, all Daniel scholars that have commented on Manuscript 1 and 2 have concluded that the majority of these notations... Manuscript. I got to skip up a little bit. Manuscript 1 and 2 includes autograph notations in a hand very different from the principal scribes that appear to be authorial. Such notations include the addition of nine marginal glosses and substantive revisions to approximately 20 stanzas within the body of the work. All Daniel scholars have commented on manuscripts 1 and 2, and some have concluded that the majority of these notations are in Daniel's hand. Okay, so we know that this is like being personally looked over and not the whole thing written by Daniel, but that Daniel's having some scribe write it, and then he's going through and making notations and stuff on it. Okay. So now the important part is he's going to point out there are differences between the manuscript and the printed version of the Civil Wars, and that is significant because that's how we can spot that Shakespeare, whoever Shakespeare is, must be using this written version. Okay. As described by Soranci, manuscript 1 to 2 exhibits 150 or so differences between the manuscript and the printed edition. I count approximately 190, significantly more than Soranci. However, it's unclear how Soranci made his count. Alternate methods of enumerating variants might potentially find between 150 and 200 variants. Of those 150 plus variants, I have noted only 6 instances in which the later, and we can see some of these manuscripts. That's manuscript 1 and 2. Real nice, real pretty. Almost
this is how Chance writes.
Almost looks like handy, honestly. Which, that's for another video. But I know a lot of Baconians think Bacon wrote handy because his handwriting's so similar. Guys, go look at any secretary hand. It's all absurdly similar. Not saying Bacon is handy is wrong, but this sure looks a lot like handy, handsy, and handy. Okay, but yeah, that's manuscript 3, 22 lines, fewer than 3 stanzas.
And I guess he was comparing to these other ones where, this does look all neat and nice here. And then when you get to these other ones, it kind of goes all the way over to the edge. It's like, just like you're saying, just use up all the bit of the paper, really.
Which is exactly what handy stuff looks like too, honestly. Like, and pretty much the whole copy of Sir Thomas More, it doesn't look all prettied up like that.
And, it kind of reminds me of, you'll kind of throw out this imagery, when you're kind of pitching, authors coming in and out, and you'll be, this guy comes in there and, touches it up, and this, literally the guy just sort of, all right, in a big fury, here's what I got down for you, trim it up, there you go, I got, you got a skeleton or something to work with.
And, you Oxfordians, that's the scriptorum sort of model, right, that we have, several hands working on several things in different places or in collaboration, but there does seem to be somebody coming in and touching it up. Or shout out to you Florians, that John Florio is doing that later in the revision of the folio. There does seem to be that sort of phenomenon happening all the time. That we constantly have somebody and people going and writing and revising. I think we've got this real warped vision of what the era is because of Victorian era scholars taking seriously Hemmings and Condell's comments that Shakespeare never blotted out a line. Well, that's stupid. That's stupid and wrong, and why would you believe that? And then the common response is that why would you not believe that? Why would they lie about that? And it's that because that's
it's inconceivable.
Yeah, it's inconceivable. Never blotted out a line. Get out of here. Come on.
It's insults writers for the most part, unless but
go to any writing class. The common phrase is writing is 90% of writing is rewriting. Only 10% of writing is actually writing. The rest of it is rewriting, revising, re-editing, rethinking, gestating,
honing, polishing.
And, to be fair, and a lot of people say that maybe things are overproduced and over-edited and overthought now, and with our editing and software capabilities, you can always go back and always touch something up, and that maybe we do it too much. But
people explain that for novel lengths getting longer,
Yep.
because of word processors, don't have to go back and reuse resources like a typewriter or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. If I had to use a typewriter, like novels are 5 pages, man. Like max. It'd take me a year to write more than 10. It's jammed. So shout out to you folks that had to use typewriters and electric typewriters and early word processors. Brady and I are old, but we're not that old in the sense that we grew up on the original Microsoft Word processor on Windows 98, 96, whatever those. I'm a year older, so but back to it, folks. Let's see. I want to go ahead and let's see. We can honestly skip through some of the stuff that he's talking about with the variance between the Civil Wars and the manuscripts, except let's see.
There's a bunch of stuff about Mountjoy's death and Mary Sidney on 248.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that part. Why do I not have that annotated? Okay. In establishing the dates of the manuscripts, it is tempting to assume that they precede the October 11th, 1594 entry of the Civil Wars in the Stationer's Register. However, it is possible that they were prepared and revisions were made to the poem after the registration. The entry in the Stationer's Register was conditional, stating that before it be printed, he shall procure sufficient authority for the printing of it, increasing the possibility of changes between registration and printing. The dates of Manuscript 1 and 2 can be established with greater precision than that of Manuscript 3 as a terminus post quem. That's the earliest date that we can cut something off at. In the 5th stanza of the first book, Daniel thanks Mountjoy for providing him refuge and encouraging his efforts. And thou, Charles Mountjoy, born the world's delight, that has received into thy quiet shore me tempest-driven fortune tossed white, underline that word, tired with expecting and could hope no more, and cheerest on my better years to write a sadder subject than I took before. Let's see. In the 5th stanza of the first book, Daniel thanks Mountjoy for providing him refuge and encouraging his efforts. Charles Blount became Baron Mountjoy on June 27th, 1594, upon the death of his brother. This establishes the first date that Daniel would have referred to Blount as Mountjoy, and so determines the earliest date of the manuscript. The terminus postquem for the manuscript of the 3rd book is undetermined. However, the references in the manuscript suggest that it was prepared after Daniel parted ways with his patron Mary Sidney, the Countess of Pembroke. In the final stanzas of the manuscript, Daniel invokes Queen Elizabeth, his sovereign muse. Help, O sovereign muse, help on my course, if these my toils be grateful in thy eyes. This is consistent with the stanzas of manuscripts 1 to 2 that refer to Eliza, Daniel's sacred goddess, as his muse. Hence, if he's trying to write for Elizabeth, that means he's not having to focus his poetry on Mary Sidney as his number one patron. So it means he's probably left her and he's over at his buddy Devereux's house, Essex, or he's over at his buddy Mountjoy's house. Because he's too poor to have a house, I guess. But I don't know. That goes into some of the misunderstandings of the era that we say, oh, Stratford had, or Shakespeare had this place in Stratford, but where did he live in London? And then they say, oh, he lived in these tiny little dinky cottages. And why would some guy living in these horrible dinky little cottage apartment things be writing for the Earl of Southampton? And he's doing that to get money so he doesn't have to live in these dinky cottages. And it's I just wonder if the whole thing's a little bit circular, and that at some point Shakespeare's just some actor stagehand dude, and we're slapping his name on it. We're slapping the name Shakespeare on it, and maybe he becomes a front man, maybe not, and it's just this conflation of two names. But it's hard to see how the Stratford man is all getting his hands on this stuff. Okay. Let's see. So let's skip ahead.
Yeah, for as much as they can connect some of the writing and the parallelisms between all the stuff and the homages between it and how it's like, dang, yeah, he must have read this earlier manuscript and all this sort of stuff. Once again, we're still in this sort of vacuum of all these other like relevant facts that would help us actually put those guys in the same room or anything else rather than just a random will or a random tax document that has no real connection to the scene that we're actually trying to deduce, right?
Right.
So.
And I think, like, on that note, like it says here, the dedicatee of his earlier work, The Tragedy of Cleopatra, this indicates a likely change between October 19th, 1593, when Cleopatra was entered into the Stationer's Register, and the production of the Civil War's manuscript. So we have some point between 1593, or fall 1593, and June 1594, we have Samuel Daniel leaving Mary Sidney and no longer my patron and kind of parting ways, and maybe there's even like some bad blood, who knows. I just want to point out what a crazy time in the world of literature and theater this is for the English Renaissance, because this is right when like Marlowe, right after Marlowe's dead, and then right as Kidd is dying, and right as Strange is dying. Strange dies April 1594. We're in June 1594. This is right when the theaters are closing for the plague. This is right when Sir Thomas More is supposed to be getting pinned. This is also, like I said, not just Kidd, Marlowe, but all these university wits, guys, disappear, and right as they disappear, this is all exactly when we start seeing Dekker possibly writing, Chettle possibly writing. We start seeing Michael Drayton pop on the scene with his sonnet sequence in 1593. So, like, this is so important. This is 1593, the printing of Venus and Adonis, the first printing of the name Shakespeare. Like, this is the nexus point, folks. Like, this is the heart of the whole thing. And maybe Daniel's not going to answer every one of those discrepancies or issues, but, like, maybe Daniel is a key into it, a way to start thinking about it. And maybe if, like, we can't put Shakespeare and Daniel together, we need to reframe it and say, all right, look, Shakespeare's not Shakespeare, Daniel's not Daniel, something else weird is going on here. Okay, so let's see. The nature of Daniel's autograph revisions, and this is on to the next section, indicates that manuscript 1 and 2 preceded the quarto of 1595. However, I have not yet evaluated evidence of which came first, the manuscript version of the poem or Richard II. This inclusion of material depicting an unhistorically mature Queen Isabel suggests that the manuscript preceded the play. As noted, Shakespeare scholars generally agree that the playwright consulted Daniel's poem while writing Richard II.
Just funny because, like, why?
Yeah.
Why is some playwright consulting a poet? You know, it's like, are we going to say that those mediums, like, are really wholly interchangeable in that sense? You know, it's like, maybe would he have a wild hair and he's like, oh, I'm just going to go read some poetry. Like, that'll be my next inspiration for this play, which will be like, so much of this sort of style or something, right?
We have, like, copyright to prevent something like that happening now. Like, you can't just, like, go to the bookstore and pick up the new bestseller and, like, dude, I'm writing this into a movie right now. You cannot do that. Maybe they could. Maybe they were allowed to. But, like, something else happened, right? Okay. Let's see. So, clearly, the manuscript is written before the play. We can skip ahead and go to 250. I got a lot of annotations here. Okay. So, it says, over the past 40 years, so since 1980-ish, substantially all critical analysis has accepted that the influence is indicated and the direction of influence was from Daniel to Shakespeare. Okay? So get that in your head, folks.
Yeah.
From Daniel to Shakespeare. No matter who you think Shakespeare is, get that in your head. From Daniel to Shakespeare. Okay, so because a lot of people want to say that Shakespeare is this lone, awesome genius, a lot of people that say that, guess what they end up doing? They end up saying, my guy wrote Samuel Daniel too, and maybe Brady and I are guilty of that. You know, our True Shakespeare video is about Samuel Daniel. It's not even about Shakespeare. But, you know, go Bob Prechter. one of his voices of Oxford is Samuel Daniel. He has to say that. I don't know what kind of actual connections there are between any of these people that are all clearly Sydney Circle people, Essex Circle people, Herbert Circle people. I don't know exactly how that links Oxford any closer than Bacon, Mary, or Philip, but I still got to read Prechter's stuff fully. That said, plenty of internet Baconians, nameless internet Baconians, just out there in the woodworks. Well, I mean, I say that because what's one of them named? Phoenix? I forget. He's one of these the Phoenix is one of these Baconians, and the Phoenix has an essay on Samuel Daniel and Francis Bacon being Samuel Daniel. It's pretty thin. That said, they have to do it because there's so much Daniel here, and it's clear that it's going from Daniel to Shakespeare. As David Weiss will show in his thesis, it goes the other way too, but it seems more the one way than the other. It seems more the ideas come out in Daniel before Shakespeare. That's the way I would put it. I don't even know if I want to, because if they are the same writer, I don't want to say it comes from Daniel to Shakespeare if it's the same writer. That's silly. But clearly most of the Danielian ideas precede the Shakespearean. But there are some Shakespearean ideas or phrases that pop up in Daniel after Shakespeare seems to have been the first one. But yeah, to Brady's point, like, he's saying, like, why go and turn a poet? Well, we do have plenty of people turn poet stuff into plays, but it's never so, like, at the same time. And it's usually, like, translations from other stuff, like French and Italian, or, like, old dead people, like, Musophilus is, as I mentioned in our last live stream. If you folks don't know, not Musophilus, that's Samuel Daniel, sorry. Musidorus, if you're not familiar with Musidorus, which was an anonymous play that does get attributed to Shakespeare back in the day when it gets printed, and I guess there's still some minority people that do think it's Shakespeare's, although most think it's maybe Green or Peele or somebody else that just gets the leftovers. But as much as we give it to Green or Peele as the leftovers, apparently Musidorus is by far the most successful play of the era. Like, let that sink in. By far the most successful, most printed and reprinted play of the era. Sold like hotcakes. Musidorus. I mean, you're familiar with that one, right, Brady? Musidorus, the one where our great hero with the great name Musidorus does the things. Like, he fights the aliens, I guess, and then... So, yeah, what is Musidorus? Well, Musidorus is taken from Sidney's Arcadia, but Sidney's dead, presumably, by the time Musidorus is coming out. Most people say it's early 90s, maybe even later. Maybe a few people say it could be from the 80s, but still, Sidney's dead. Like, so, this is... You can go, you're allowed to go and touch it, but writing something that somebody's still living and just putting out and turning it into a play with nary a mention of him, it's weird. And just for a second, though, let's remember, guys, when this is coming out, Richard II, it doesn't say Shakespeare on it. So even though Samuel Daniel stuff gets printed as Samuel Daniel, you little Civil Wars by the poet Samuel Daniel, ooh, I got this book at the store, cool. And then, yeah, let's go see this play, Richard II, and it's just like this poem, cool. You go see that play, it never mentions Shakespeare. Several years later, when it's being printed in quarto, Richard II is one of the first to mention Shakespeare's name or initials, but that's not till a few years after, 1595, when it's coming out. There's no way to link it to Shakespeare. 97, 98, when quartos and miras and that stuff are coming out, you can link it. So, just want to point that out, that maybe that factors into this somehow. That we haven't fully constructed which plays are and aren't Shakespeare's. At this point, Shakespeare is just a name on two giant poems for fancy hoity-toity earls and countesses and stuff. That's what we got. We say that the Stratford man is acting, and I want to say the earliest dates of him being in some of these things date to around the mid-90s. I need to brush up on that. But, like, And we can see that maybe he played in the Richard II plays, but like that's about it. So let's continue. Okay, so George M. Logan, in two essays from the 1970s, affirms this conclusion. Logan discussed the relationship among the Civil Wars, Richard II, and Lucan's Pharsalia. Who is Lucan? You know who Lucan is? He's a Roman poet.
Okay.
What is Shakespeare doing touching Roman poets? He's not supposed to know all that Latin. He's supposed to have little Greek and less Latin. Or can we look up that quote? Can we pause and look at? I know I'm the Shakespeare authorship guy. I'm supposed to know it. My head's just bursting with seams.
Who is this supposed to be by?
It's Hemmings and Condell.
Well, what should I write? Shakespeare, no Greek, less Latin?
Sorry, not Hemmings and Condell. That's Ben Jonson. Okay, small Latin, less Greek. Thank you. I've been absolutely just mutilating the quote because I always say little Greek and less Latin, and that bothers me because nobody knows more Greek than Latin. Like nobody that speaks English. Like if you're a classics guy, you always know more Latin than Greek.
Oh, really?
I know more Latin than Greek. I know a little of both, but and so many more. Like Latin was still a lingua franca in a lot of cases. Greek was not a lingua franca. That was for very learned people to read, and so Greek was not often translated for people. You had to go read Greek direct, whereas Latin was totally translated. And so that said, Lucan could be translated, so Shakespeare could be reading Lucan translated. Maybe same with Samuel Daniel. I would assume that whoever most of us think Daniel and or Shakespeare are or is, we probably think that our authors actually can read the Latin and Greek, so may not have needed any sort of English version of Lucan. There's this long-running assumption that Sidney had some English version of Aristotle, and that he was writing defensive poetry based on some English version translation of Aristotle. And in the 70s or 80s, a few scholars started pointing out, no, that's wrong. Sidney's totally taken directly from the Greek and is translating it himself. So let's see. Most of the material from the Civil Wars that overlaps with Shakespeare's portrayal of Isabel and Richard II is included in Book 2 of Daniel's poem, and substantially all of it appears in Manuscript 1 and 2. This establishes the probability that Manuscripts 1 through preceded Shakespeare's plays. It does not answer the question of whether Shakespeare used a manuscript or printed edition. Let's see. I skipped a line, sorry. Based on Logan's analysis, Daniel used Lucan's epic on the Roman Civil Wars as a central model for his poem, and the instances in which Shakespeare echoes Lucan reflect elements adapted first by Daniel. So, any of the people that were listening that do think Shakespeare, they're like, see, there, Shakespeare got Lucan through Daniel. Shakespeare didn't even need to read Lucan, much less know Latin or any of that. Look, he's reading it through Daniel. We're back to square one. Now where is he getting Daniel? Okay, let's see. Based on Logan's Daniel used Lucan's epic. Based on Logan's analysis, portions of Richard II that both echo Daniel and reflect Lucan's influence are likely to have been written after the corresponding section of the Civil Wars. Logan asserts that Daniel's narration of Queen Isabel waiting to greet her returning husband and meeting with him in prison is an integral part of the modeling of his poem on Lucan's epic. So this whole idea of Queen Isabel going to sort of comfort her victimized husband, that's not part of the historical narrative. And that's maybe one of the most powerful things in Richard II. That's pretty much the only reason she's in the play. It's not maybe her name's also Queen Isabel. But very similar character dynamic is Marlowe's Edward II, where you have Edward II getting deposed for being too weak and effeminate, similarly to Richard II, and ineffectual. And in that one, his wife does want to side with him, but he keeps spurning her because he's totally into his boyfriend, and Gaveston. And but even in that one, there's a little bit of that dynamic, but that dynamic is so big in this one that at the end she doesn't care if Richard has been, not giving her the attention. Like, she just feels so dang bad for what happens to Richard. And it seems to come from Lucan, and it seems to come from Lucan through Daniel, and Daniel's the one that doesn't just take it from Lucan, he applies it after translating Lucan directly, he applies it to his Civil Wars poem about Richard II and his wife. So he invents that character dynamic from placing it from Lucan. Shakespeare says, "Yeah, I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that character dynamic." That's a lot. That's not just like a line. That's a whole setup. But doesn't mean it's the same authors. It just means influence. It's definitely not a coincidence. It's not Shakespeare also was going to make this character dynamic. That's ridiculous. It's not parsimonious. Okay, if we go a little further, we get into some
page?
252. So he says all 6 stanzas that appear in manuscripts 1 and 2, but not in any printed edition, are from Book 2 of this poem. So just a heads up on that. Let's see. They include 2 from Richard's lament on finding that his subjects have joined Bolingbroke, 2 from Richard's apostrophe to his rebel cousin as he prepares to meet him, and 2 from Isabel's complaint as she seeks to meet Richard on his return. In both Manuscript 1 and 2, in Quarto 1595, Daniel describes Richard's entry into London through the eyes of Isabel. In both versions, she is overcome with grief and addresses him in her mind. "Oh, dost thou thus return against me?" "Oh, dost thou thus return again to me?" Oh, it's return, sorry. One more time. Edit this out, Brady.
3rd time's a charm.
"Oh, dost thou thus return again to me? Are these the triumphs for thy victories? Is this the glory thou dost bring with thee from that unhappy Irish enterprise? Oh, have I made so many vows to see thy safe return and see thee in this wise? Is this the looked-for comfort thou dost bring to come a captive and whence out a king?" This stanza is followed in Manuscripts 1 and 2 by 2 that do not appear in the quarto. Our sad attempt was that to take in hand, and I'm going to actually skim to the last part here. "Or was there none that with respective eye would once vouchsafe to look upon their lord? Deserved he no regard in passing by, no not the least applause by sign or word? Well, London, thou that saw'st this injury, thy streets may rue the grace they did afford, to be the stage unto this wicked act, and cause the curses and bewail the fact." In the second of these, Daniel employs theater imagery to illustrate Richard's plight, stating that he received no regard in passing by, not the least applause on the stage unto this wicked act. And of course, that's a play on act, right? In this equivalent section of Richard II, the captured king's entrance to London is not presented on stage, but related by York. As with Isabel's narrative, York's recounting of the event includes a theater metaphor. After describing the throngs cheering Bolingbroke's victorious entry into the city, York is asked by his wife, "Alack, poor Richard, where rode he the whilst?" He replies, "As in a theatre the eyes of men, after a well-graced actor leaves the stage, and are idly bent on him that enters next, thinking his prattle to be tedious. Even so, or with much more contempt men's eyes did scowl on gentle Richard. No man cried, God save him. No joyful tongue gave him his welcome home." Although the words differ, the conceit is analogous to Daniel's. Shakespeare's Richard is an unregarded actor who receives welcome from no joyful tongue, while Daniel's garners not the least applause by sign or word. Both use the word stage in their descriptions, and both emphasize the eyes of the spectators. Shakespeare's with much more contempt men's eyes, paralleling Daniel's none with respective eye.
I don't know if there's like any connection with that, but it does kind of remind me that spends his hours strutting and fretting upon the stage. That Macbeth soliloquy that we've actually talked before too. So
and, like it's
I don't know if it's like a commonplace thing for them to do too all the time.
It's hard to say. We touched on that in a previous video a little bit when we talked about Pythagoras, and Pythagoras is the first one to sort of invent the world as a stage or the world as a theater.
Being like fourth wall breaking or something like that,
It seems that it's sort of a lot of this Pythagorean Greek type of thought that's bringing that stuff out. I will say that Sydney uses those metaphors all the time. I'm sure there's others in the 80s that are doing it. I need to look into that. Let's see.
Yeah, how many people, I guess you would be the guy to know, but next time you go through any of your other next plays, be like, how many of them just happen to, maybe, especially if it's not Shakespeare would be nice too, but how many of them just have to get that little line in about, oh, don't forget, like, we're up here on a stage, or this sort of, like, fourth wall acknowledgement of this presentation going on,
And I guess what he's pointing out is that it's specifically for the same event, that we have, Richard II, Civil Wars is, it's definitely not in here, but Civil Wars is a big thick one too. It's a big old long epic poem, and like we have a ton of events. We could have had this theater metaphor for any event when he's getting first told the news, or maybe back before and people are plotting against him, or long after he's been deposed and he's bewailing his state. But
some other like scenario, like, oh look, we're all soldiers in a battle scene on this, and we're all about to enact this battle scene or something like that. Something even unrelated, but it's both having the king sort of like beleaguered or whatever.
Beleaguered, coming back to the city, and nobody supporting him. And so I think even though the language is pretty different, which
I thought they both kind of open up the same way, talking about the cap. He kind of talks about it too, about the eyes sort of seeing everything, as things open up, blah 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 blah.
Right.
I forget what it
was. Let's see.
Was there none with the respective eyes, and then as in the theater, the eyes of men. I don't know.
Yes. Which I'm glad you bring up eye. I know I pitched this too much. But guess who's obsessed with eyes and uses phraseology about eyes, optics, sight all the time? Yeah, it's Philip Sidney.
That's not just a chance crackpot thing. That's like definitely an academic acknowledged.
And there's
I make sure Chance is not hitting the crackpot too often.
To be fair to Chance and his crackpot, there are things that are in the crackpot bin that I'm getting and I'm able to take and we can put it in the academic bin. So Brady and I, for several videos, including our last video, have been pitching dude, we don't need to really go too heavily with a Marlovian authorship theory. Surely there is carryover between the work of Marlowe and the work of Shakespeare, but to say that the actual man named Christopher Marlowe from Deptford, Kent, is the one that faked his death and is writing that's absurd. Patently absurd. And I think at this point, my big reason is that we don't even fully understand the canon of Marlowe. All you Marlovians, shots fired at Bash and Conrad. Marlowe didn't write 100% of that, if any. I think it's super ill-defined what Marlowe is or isn't, but at least that's now being acknowledged. I came across an essay that's pretty recent from 2022. I came across it this weekend, and it's called Disintegrating Marlowe, and it's calling out all of Marlovian scholarship from the start, saying, you guys are building a character, you're building a narrative with tons of presumptions, not a lot of good scholarship, and if you do a lot of good scholarship, so much of this is suspect. And it's, what people are starting to do a little bit with Shakespeare and have been kind of pigeon-toeing around, adding in Middleton's name into the canon, adding in John Fletcher's
collaboration.
Name. Felt so good to say that. we're definitely getting there, but Disintegrating Marlowe, I think, for the longest time, has been in a lot of people's crackpot bin, but that's now maybe not a fully consensus accepted fact, but people are going to start working through it in academia because at least one guy has written a really good essay on it. And yeah, it's not just where there's smoke, there's fire. It's like there's a whole forest of burned down trees with that one. That said, reeling it back to Daniel and Shakespeare. So, the similarity between these two passages, he says, does not prove influence. There is no shared extended collocation to confirm such influence. Collocation's when you actually have the same phraseology and words being put in the same little area of text. To confirm such influence, and the idea of monarchs as actors performing their actions on the world stage was a common one. An illustrative example from a work that both Daniel and Shakespeare would have been familiar with is Thomas More's History of King Richard III. These matters be king's games, as it were stage plays, and for the most part played upon scaffolds, in which poor men be but lookers on. And, alright, I know the horse is gone and dead, but Sydney was obsessed with horses, so I'll beat a dead horse for a little bit. Guess what Sydney loved to read? Sir Thomas More. He's a huge fan of Sir Thomas More. Alright, next.
The horse bit was good. I'll give you that one.
As with Daniel and Shakespeare, More emphasizes the importance of the role of the observers in monarch stage plays. Queen Elizabeth was similarly quoted by Holinshed as observing, "For we princes, I tell you, are set on stages, in the sight and view of all the world duly observed, the eyes of many behold our actions." The conventional conceit of princes acting on the world stage, playing a role in their eyes' subjects, suggests that Daniel's and Shakespeare's similar imagery may be coincidental. Yet, the stanzas of the first four books in which Richard's queen watches him return in grace behind Bolingbroke are in a section where Shakespeare's familiarity with the poem is clear. As reflected in both Manuscripts 1 and 2 in Quarto 95, Daniel provides details in his description of Bolingbroke's Richard's entry into London that are embraced, though adapted by Shakespeare. In York's description, Bolingbroke, the triumphant rebel, rides through the streets to the cheers of supporters while Richard follows, dejected and scorned. The description of Richard's entering London behind his captor and being ignored has little basis in the English chronicles. As reported by Holinshed, Richard was brought up the next way to Westminster, and the following day was had to the Tower, as one group of angry citizens sought to attack the captured king and another came to his rescue. Many evil disposed persons assembling themselves together in great numbers intended to have met with him, that they might have slain him, but the mayor and aldermen, it's funny, I's can be J's or Y's, sorry guys. But the mayor and aldermen gathered to them the worshipful commoners, by whose policy, and not without much ado, the other were revoked from their evil purpose. Shakespeare's account of the entrance closely mirrors Daniel's poem, although the two depictions share few verbal echoes. And real quick, I want to bring up Walt Whitman for a second. You know, Walt Whitman, that little essay that we read way back when we were mentioning our history of Shakespeare Doubt videos, that little essay that Walt Whitman has, he says that it's almost like whoever put this whole scheme together of faking Shakespeare and, you know, constructing all these author names, and not just Shakespeare but a bunch of them, and all these concealed aristocrats, whoever did it, like, did it in mind to, like, obfuscate people trying to find it. That they did it to befuddle any sort of detective work that comes after. And I want to say that this, like, if that's true, then this is, like, maybe an instance of that, like, whoever Samuel Daniel Shakespeare are, even if they're different people, like, Shakespeare could have copied it more closely to Daniel. Like, there's other instances of Shakespeare taking other poets, maybe not directly from the exact time, like we're saying, but, and, you know, taking a little more wholesale, or maybe not Shakespeare, but other playwrights doing that. Why the insistence on taking the ideas but changing the word so wholly? Maybe it's so we don't notice it, and lo and behold, it took us like 400 years to figure it out. So maybe there's something to this, that, like, if Samuel Daniel and Shakespeare are written by two people that are closely knit or are the same person, and they want to hide that fact, they're going to go out of their way. That said, I almost want to say that there are parts of Richard II that are written by the same hand as Samuel Daniel, but I want to say that there are parts that aren't. And some of these carryovers are parts that aren't, but they're still going on the outline that the Samuel Daniel writer had already put together with the poem. And at some point, I guess that would make kind of sense. Like, if you already have the basis and you know that you can write with other people and you've done this before in other plays, it'd be real easy to just, I already banged out this poem, let's turn it in. And I'm sure the banging out of the poem and the play were preconceived in a political fashion. Maybe not sure of it, but that's where my gut instinct lies. And that's where Matthew Brand Davies' thesis and the Essex stuff comes in, maybe. But we're not going to get into that today. Okay. We can... So, we can go a little further on to page 258. Okay, yeah, you're there. Alright. So, right in the middle of the second paragraph, it says, the use of a theatrical metaphor to describe Richard, however, appears only in this section of Richard II. So I think that's why it's not just a coincidence. Shakespeare's Richard, who employs numerous poetic conceits to illustrate his plight, never refers to himself as an actor, nor does anyone in the play. The lack of explicit stage imagery is surprising, given Shakespeare's Richard's theatrical nature. Yeah, like I said, he's not sober-minded Daniel. He's over-the-top Daniel. He's super theatrical. Look at me. I'm the center of everybody's attention. I'm going to steal you with my words and my expressions and my gestures. And okay, so that's an excellent point. The words actor and stage appear only in the same episode where Daniel similarly employs theater terminology. Boom, folks. Yes, we know that Shakespeare loves doing his stage and actor metaphors, but here's what's weird. Here's what's weird. He only does it when Daniel does it. Like, that's smoking gun, folks. That's it.
Yeah. The words actor and stage appear only in the same episode where Daniel similarly employs theatrical terminology, including the word stage. So,
although this is not conclusive, the corollary that would have helped dismiss the similarity as coincidence can be ruled out. Shakespeare did not invoke theatramundi concept to expand on a central image of the play. While Richard's self-conscious theatricality is a recurring theme, the language of theater is definitely not. So here he gets into a little bit of stuff that maybe expands beyond Richard II, so I'll read it, and then we'll almost be done here. Daniel's deleted stanza includes the unique phrase, respective I. In the context of the description, and that's interesting that those are the deleted passages. Like, why were they deleted? Maybe because they popped up a little too heavily. Whitman, you genius. In the context of the description, this refers to an I that shows respect. The use of the word respective to mean showing respect is unusual. In the Oxford English Dictionary, it is the third definition, characterized by, expressive of, or showing respect or deference. The first describes the relationship between two things, respectively, and the second, the act of being attentive. Shakespeare used the word respective infrequently, only 4 times. 2 Gentlemen of Verona, Romeo and Juliet, King John, The Merchant of Venice. I believe those are all mid-90s plays. I'm not too sure on the dating of Verona, but yeah, King John, that's 95, 96. Merchant of Venice, that's 96. Romeo and Juliet, 94, 95, somewhere around there. Like, this is all the exact same era. Like, this is all right at the mid-90s. And this is, once again, this is a big wild card question mark era for me, because if you've watched me and Brady's channel, our most popular video is the Henslow Diary. And so the Henslow Diary is, it's our rock, it's our foundation. We always go back to it and say what we're reading, what can we do to apply that to the Henslow Diary, and vice versa. And the unbelievably frustrating thing about the Henslow Diary is that, we get all these names from 97 and after. and we get all these play names from the early 90s. We do get the names up through 95 and 96, but like only the titles. We don't get the names of the authors. And so this is right at that middle period, right before we get these authors' names. And if Henslow's Diary just had a few years earlier where he's like, oh, and I paid this guy for Richard II, and I paid, it said Samuel Daniel writes Richard II in the Henslow Diary. All right, done, easy. But like, once again, going with Whitman, just so convenient that this era that we're really trying to piece into, this early to mid 90s, that's exactly when we don't get a lot of the Henslow names. Okay. And one thing I would like to mention about these is Samuel Daniel, his only like essay attempt, like usually he's a poet, but his big prose essay attempt, I don't know if you can see it with the glare of the light, but it's called A Defense of Rhyme, which sounds a lot like a defense of poetry. Yeah, A Defense of Rhyme. So probably he's into rhyming, and yeah, he's a poet, would make sense, and he's writing it against Thomas Campion, another poet who incidentally rhymes, but writes an essay saying, we gotta quit rhyming, that stuff's stupid. But Samuel Daniel's like, no, rhyming's good. Just want to point out these things that are happy to have the same word respective pop-up that pops up in Daniel. Those are all Shakespeare's plays with the most rhymes. Like that's almost the exact list of Shakespeare's plays that rhyme the most. Like, I don't know, have you ever wondered like why some of Shakespeare's plays rhyme and some don't? And like, you know, you get some real watered down version that, oh, they wrote rhymes in the 80s and then into the 90s they got rid of rhymes, and it's like, that's not really how it works. It's more that like we don't get rhymes, and then all of a sudden in the mid 90s, rhymes are totally the hot new thing, and it's right when sonnets are popping out. And then quickly after, we're back to blank verse, and then onto prose even. And so we get a lot of like mixed prose and poetry kind of stuff into the 1600s, but like in this 94, 95, 96, like Shakespeare and maybe others putting a lot of rhyme into their drama. Okay, so let me see. Here's another interesting part that I wanted to bring up. Dating Richard II.
What page?
Oh, I'm sorry. 260. Yeah, this is where it's going to get juicy for us again. For you guys that are getting bogged down by all the attribution and, you know, reading of texts and checking bibliographies. Here's some nice little historical nuggets. There exists more evidence for the date of Richard II than for many other Shakespeare plays. Two external pieces of evidence have led scholars to place the play in mid to late 1595. The first is the publication of Daniel's first 4 books, and the second is a letter from Edward Hoby that may refer to a commissioned performance of the play. The conclusion drawn from both pieces of evidence, however, are subject to interpretation. What they say about the date of composition of Richard II may also be contradictory. So, on December 7th of 1595, a man named Edward Hoby wrote to a cousin of his, a certain man named Robert Cecil. Yeah, you Oxfordians, that's Big Bad Cecil himself, or Big Bad Cecil Jr. For you, non-Oxfordians, this is the Secretary of State's son that becomes the Secretary of State himself in a few years. Kind of takes over Walsingham's spymaster ring, and so's maybe the head spymaster dude, but he's also a guy that's got a lot of beef with the Earl of Essex that will grow from here on out, from, early 90s out. But maybe is also at odds, but then sometimes buddies with Walter Raleigh. So Robert Cecil, and also Robert Cecil, may just be Richard III. He may be the pure influence of Richard III, this super conniving Machiavellian. That said, Hoby wrote to his cousin Robert Cecil, inviting him to his home to view King Richard. Look, if it doesn't say which Richard does it, this could be Richard II or Richard III, right? But here's what's nice. It's Robert Cecil. Would you invite Robert Cecil to come over and watch Richard III? if it's a play that like almost clearly looks like it's making fun of him, like it's probably the other Richard play, you know, like it's like there's two Birth of a Nation movies, right? There's the old D.W. Griffith, which is about the start of the KKK, and then there's the remake by I've forgotten his name. New hot young filmmaker. But it's all about Nat Turner's rebellion. And
that's right.
Slave Rebellion.
William Matthew McConaughey or whatever.
No, that's Free State of Jones.
God dang it!
No, Birth of a Nation's much more artsy, kind of like a cool Spike Lee thing. It's you know all black, all but like better than Spike Lee. I'm not a Spike Lee fan. But those are both movies. Like if say I had some famous black celebrity like Michael B. Jordan. I was saying that he was watching I had some letter that said Michael's going to come over to my house to watch Birth of a Nation. We can infer that he's not watching the D.W. Griffith one. Like we can infer that. Like nobody. It's 4 hours of black and white praising the KKK and showing how they like saved the South and helped the South reconstruct after the Civil War. No. Michael B. Jordan's not going to be watching that. What is his name? Nate. Oh, it's going to bother me. I'm going to have to look that up. Yeah, so probably, maybe, or you and I have always doubted that maybe some of this animosity is not so much animosity and it's all kind of tongue-in-cheek stuff. So maybe it is Richard III. And it's like, hey, come watch this thing that we totally caricatured you. We got you. We roasted you good, buddy. I don't know. I don't... You Oxfordians are like, no way.
There's always that thing about purposeful beefs and sort of contentions like that because you're trying to once again throw the trail off maybe of something else, you know. You put a bunch of heat on, oh, look, a big bag conniving Robert Wall. Yeah, it's like that's the point where you don't see what the other hand's doing, right?
Something like and Biggie are beefing against each other. Pay attention to that while you don't realize that both of their record labels are being bought out by the same monopolizing company, Sony. And while the beef continues, it's owned by the same people. Yeah, don't look at that merger. Just keep looking at the beef. Could have something like that happening all throughout this whole Shakespeare scene and outside of it too. That said,
P. Diddy is involved with Shakespeare. We're saying it now.
Hopefully not. God forbid. Okay. What Hobie meant has been debated. While many believe him to be citing a private performance of Richard II, others hold that this letter may refer to a performance of Richard III or even to a painting. Accordingly, it is uncertain whether the letter provides any evidence about the date of Richard III. One of the factors indicating that Hobie could be referring to a play is that, check it folks, he's the son-in-law of Henry Carey, the Lord Chamberlain, patron of the acting company that owned and performed the play. So, it probably is a play. And the fact that we get Richard II being performed pretty soon after this in theater, like, Richard III had already, our understanding of Richard III, that'd been out for a few years by 1595. So, like, that, you're not inviting Robert Cecil to come over and watch a 2-year-old Redbox DVD. Like, nobody, which, did I just call Richard III a 2-year-old Redbox DVD? Alright, hold on, I gotta, seppuku myself on. Okay. Alright. I need a spray bottle and spray me when I say
that might be an HBO Max subscription quality tier, okay?
We got a big Patreon subscription. One time only. Right. Sorry guys, that's the dark sense of humor. I was talking about Evie, shout out. Alright. Reel it back in. Okay. So, the connection between Hobie and the acting company, combined with the high-profile status of his invitee, suggests that Hobie may be referring to a performance of a recently staged and controversial play. The conclusion of these debates remains open, but the current consensus is that the letter does refer to Richard II and indicates that the play had recently been staged in London, allowing it to gain recognition and Hobie to want to commission a private performance for Cecil. This dating of a performance of the play, however, is inconsistent with an interpretation of another letter. Oh boy. Oh boy. And once again, folks, for all you Shakespeare doubters out there, and especially you concealed aristocratic doubters, so Oxfordians, we're getting Cecil's name. Boom, boom, boom. You Pembroke people, we got Mary Sidney and Mountjoy already. Boom, boom. Of course, us Sydney folks, we got Mary Sidney and Mountjoy. Boom, boom. You Baconians, all this is checking out for you. You're like, yeah, Bacon knows all these guys. Yeah, boom, boom, boom. Of course, Oxfordians, yeah. Florians even. We've mentioned Henry Wriothesley. Like, boom. Not seeing where Shakespeare and this is all very much aristocratic people, and we'll see here with some more names. The dating of a performance of the play, however, is inconsistent with an interpretation of another letter dated a month earlier surrounding the publication of Daniel's poem. On November 3rd, 1595, Roland White sent Robert Sidney, says in here Mary Sidney's brother, but there was an older sibling. His name was Philip. Don't forget him. Philip Sidney's brother, a copy of the printed edition of the first 4 books. Writing in the postscript of a letter to him, I send your lordship the 4 books of the Civil War imprinted. White was Robert Sidney's agent, writing to him frequently about the proceedings at court, while Sidney served as the governor of Flushing. Yeah, Robert had to be the governor of Flushing because some other people died. Leicester and Sidney. Some scholars have taken the White letter to indicate that the first 4 books had only recently appeared, perhaps in the late summer to fall of 1595. So, how could Richard II have already been played if we know it's from the Civil War books, but if the Civil War books have only just been printed according to the Robert Sidney letter, how are they already doing like private performances? Like that's a month. That's too soon to put a play together based on a poem that just gets printed. So there may be 2 ways out of this inconsistency, and I'm gonna start paraphrasing here because we're running short on time, folks. But there may be 2 ways out of this inconsistency. One, that maybe that letter doesn't mean that the book just came out. Maybe the book had been out for a little while, but it had just gotten to Robert Sidney. Roland White had just gotten it to Robert. Okay, that's one. Another way is, well, like we've been saying, Shakespeare didn't need direct access to the printed copy. That he had the manuscripts the whole time. And yeah, sure, maybe that is just getting printed in November, whatever. But, like, that means that Shakespeare had access to an earlier version and not just the first printings. Okay. There's a few more lines we gotta read. So he goes into how could Shakespeare have gotten this? And I don't want to go too far into that, but he talks about Daniel Shakespeare in the Essex Circle, which mirrored by Matthew Brand Davies' thesis I got here.
Page.
262. Also, I want to give Matthew Brand Davies a shout out with his thesis. He's from University of Texas, so hook 'em horns and all that. And it's also somewhat recent, 2012. In the academic world, 10, 15, 20 years seems recent, I think. Especially this is a 400-year-old issue, and there's so many things that you may find something that was said in the 20s or 30s that people have since forgotten, and nobody knew what it meant back then, but now it means something, and we can totally look into a new idea. So, academia, while we always want it to be super cutting edge and super consensus, that's not exactly how it works. Okay, so how could Daniel and Shakespeare... Well, maybe our first guess is through Essex and Mountjoy. Let's see. So if we talk about it... references in the Civil War document Daniel's association with the Essex Circle as he revised and supplemented his poem. In a stanza from the 1595 quarto that does not appear in the manuscripts, Daniel provides a clue as to where he worked while revising the poem. In a section of the poem that envisions what might have been if Bolingbroke's overthrow of Richard had had as lawful and sure ground as the rebels' virtues, Daniel imagines that there would have been no civil wars and no need for him to write of the conflict, nor had I then at solitary brook sat framing bloody accents of these times. My bad. Mistook it. Okay. All right, sorry guys. Set framing bloody accents of these times, Daniel's reference to a solitary brook in a stanza is probably where Mountjoy lives. And so, if he's living with Mountjoy, that means he's probably closely connected with the Essex circle, as Mountjoy's the lover and husband of Penelope Rich, who is Robert's sister, which we've discussed in our Samuel Daniel video. And so, let's see. Suggesting the estate referred to in the earlier year is Wanstead, as the solitary brook. And the solitary brook is Humble Rodin, the River Rodin. Daniel scholars have inferred that the poet is worked at Mountjoy's home, Wanstead, while writing the first 4 books. There's one issue with this inference. In 1595, when the first books was published, Wanstead was owned by Essex, not Mountjoy. And I believe we actually managed to include that he's living with Essex and then Mountjoy. It's almost like he's like furniture of the house or something. Now that Essex is going to move out, Mountjoy's going to move in. You have to keep Samuel Daniel here. He won't leave the house. All right. So Mountjoy could have obtained a license for Daniel to work at Wanstead. Bloody bloody. In his apology for Philotas, penned 3 years after Essex's death, he continued to acknowledge his debt to the Earl of Essex and Mountjoy, recognizing that the Earl of Essex was particularly beholden to his bounty, perhaps hearkening to this period when Essex, along with Mountjoy, took him in. Okay, so that's fine, but what's the Essex connection with Shakespeare? It was at Wanstead where the married Lady Rich could meet discreetly with her unmarried lover Mountjoy. Daniel's proximity to Mountjoy, Lady Rich, and Essex at Wanstead would have given the poet access to Essex closet associates. Closest. That's a Freudian slip, folks. I've never thought that Mountjoy was as into Penelope as folks want to believe, and there may be another person behind there. Given the poet's access to Essex's closest associates as he supplemented his poem between 94 and 95. In 94, Daniel worked at Wanstead. Shakespeare also had connections to the Essex circle that explain how he could have gained access to a manuscript. As with most details of Shakespeare's life, there is limited documentation of his connections to Essex. During 94, however, Shakespeare had at least one link to the Essex circle, Essex's friend Henry Wriothesley, the Earl of Southampton, was the patron of Shakespeare's second narrative poem, The Rape of Lucrece, which was entered into the Stationer's Register in May of 94 and published that year. Southampton had been the dedicatee for Shakespeare's first printed work, Venus and Adonis, published a year before that. The dedication of the 2 poems to Southampton suggests that the first was well received, that by the time of the second, Shakespeare had met his patron. So, Shakespeare had never even met Southampton when he wrote Venus and Adonis? That's crazy. There's no way people actually believe that. People believe that? That dude wrote that giant poem. You people out there that think Shakespeare's Shakespeare, you think that he wrote that poem without meeting the guy? That's wild. That's inexplicable. Okay. Alright. Although debated by some Shakespeare scholars, the difference in tone between Shakespeare's dedication in 93, which begins, Right Honourable, I know not how I shall offend, and that of the 94, The love I dedicate to your lordship, indicates that between the two, Shakespeare had gained a more familiar relationship with Southampton. As Park Honan puts it, in all probability, there's that word again, Brady, probability, likely, sure,
probably,
could have been,
must have,
why not? In all probability, Shakespeare's meetings with his patron were few. Okay, so even Shakespeareans are like, he probably didn't. Maybe met the guy once. One guy was already at the Jack in the Box, and then the other guy stopped and he's like, "Wait, are you the Southampton?" He's like, "Dude, I've already picked up my fries." Great poem, dude. Do another. I'll get the car started. I don't know. Maybe that. Sorry, the Elizabethan equivalent of a Jack in the Box which would have been a Johnny in the.
Yeah.
There's a better joke there, but somebody else type it in the comments. All right. If any such meetings did occur, however, it is probable that at least one would have been in 1594, when Shakespeare's second poem was printed, when Daniel's manuscripts were produced, perhaps for Mountjoy, his prospective patron. Mountjoy was close to Southampton, a father figure to the young earl. He was also an admirer of Daniel's poem, as reflected in Gabriel Harvey's comment that the Earl of Essex much commends Albion's England. The Lord Mountjoy makes the like account of Daniel's piece of the chronicle. And I guess Gabriel Harvey knows this because reasons. I never understood how Gabriel Harvey has the skinny on everything. They didn't have Twitter. Our understanding of Gabriel Harvey is this guy doesn't even leave his house, and he just reads all this stuff and just writes all this commentary and then writes letters to people and may not even send them out. And some people think that the letters that he writes to Spencer, maybe he didn't actually write those to Spencer, and they're just these rhetorical
exercises or something like that.
So I've never quite understood how Gabriel Harvey knows what he knows, but he's supposed to be in these circles. So it is plausible that Mountjoy would share Daniel's work with Southampton, that Southampton would inform Shakespeare, whose Lucrece was influenced by Daniel's Rosamund, about the poet's latest work. Although this sequence is speculative, and I also want to point out, guys, it's Mountjoy was close to Southampton, father figure of the young earl. I don't know if that's actually true by 94. I feel like that's true by the Essex Rebellion. Maybe I'm wrong on that, and I need to double check that, but I don't know that that's totally the case. Mountjoy's supposed to sort of be this newcomer to court, that everybody's oh wow, this guy's super nice and good looking, cool, and that was it. That's it. But that's all people say about Mountjoy. He's not. Some people, there's one random person in history that's maybe he's Shakespeare, but most people are just no, just nice, good looking too. Maybe we can take this at face value here, but no less in verba. Mountjoy was close to Southampton, father figure, but it seems to me that almost the argument is here that we have Daniel to Mountjoy, Mountjoy to Essex, Essex to Southampton, Southampton to Shakespeare. To me, this is a 5-step process, and manuscripts get circulated. That's the whole point. And this guy's got his little wise guy, poor dude writer that he pulls out of the closet to make his fancy poems, and he shows it off to the other rich guy.
It almost seems like some kind of big fat liar scenario, where they're traveling on some carriage and old Samuel Daniels poem falls off the wagon, and Shakespeare walks up and picks it up, some manuscript, and he's sees it oh wow, manuscript, hey, there's not much of these, and can barely read it, it's oh well, maybe I can make something of this or whatever, I don't know,
right, or it's even like Essex is Mountjoy, oh Rosalie, look at what my boy, or Mountjoy's look at what Rosalie, look at what my boy Daniel has been doing. And then Ross is oh my god.
Now it's
so good.
The American Psycho.
Yeah, business card, right?
Yeah.
And then he goes, as soon as the other two leave, he goes into Shakespeare. You need to write better than that guy right now. Maybe, honestly, that's what the academics want us to think. And maybe there's something to that, but I don't want to dehumanize elite people that badly. I do want to do that every now and then, but not that badly. So let me see. Let's skip to the real quick. Indirection connections through Southampton therefore seem a more plausible explanation of how Shakespeare could have seen an early manuscript of the Civil Wars. So indirect, like I said, 4 or 5 steps. But if we go one more page, and this will be it. The network of individuals connecting Daniel, Southampton, and Shakespeare include Fulk Greville and John Florio.
Red flag. No,
yeah, the gang's all here, folks. And whose name has not been brought up whose name has David not brought up in this essay that's this centerpiece of all this, right? More than Essex, more than okay, maybe Leicester, but of this generation of people, Either could have had access to a manuscript of the Civil Wars and shared it with Southampton. So Fulk Greville's buddies with Henry Wriothesley. John Florio is supposed to be Wriothesley's tutor. During 1595, Greville had documented connections to both Daniel and Southampton. He asked Robert Cecil to give Daniel, his fellow poet, a source of income in the same year when he was advising Southampton on courting the Queen's favor. Fulk Greville looking out for his random buddy Samuel Daniel to make sure he has money and food and stuff. Go watch our True Shakespeare video. What's that, episode 7 or 8? See why that statement might be significant. Greville, to whom Daniel dedicated his 1599 Musophilus, is a likely candidate to have seen an early version of the Civil Wars. Florio similarly had connections to both Daniel and Southampton. He had long-standing relationship with Daniel dating back to the 1580s. I want to severely start qualifying that and call that into doubt. What we have is a lot of statements by Yeats from a few documents, and a lot of it is kind of passed around hearsay. Like the idea that one of them married the other one's sister, like that's probably not true. That's probably apocryphal.
Yeah, they're indeed citing her in this source.
Yeah, which you have to. You have to, if you want to talk about Florio, you're reading Yeats. Like that, for better or worse. Like it's pretty monopolized by Yeats, and not too much has been added to it. Hopefully Mariana's going to do some great work with the Resolute Florio channel. Please check her out. Help her get to 1,000. Want to get more Shakespeare authorship questioners able to get monetized so that we can spend more time talking about this discussion. Also, like and subscribe our channel while you're at it too. Okay, so let's see. Florio had similar connections to both Daniel and Southampton. His long-standing relationship to Daniel back to the 1580s when Daniel was a student and he a teacher at Oxford. In 1594, Florio was also Southampton's Italian tutor. Mountjoy, Greville, and Florio are three connections between Daniel and Southampton about whom we know. There are almost certainly others about whom we do not. There are many paths for Southampton to gain access to a Daniel manuscript and share it with the poet writing under his patronage in 1594, especially if that poet were contemplating writing a play on the reign of Richard II. There are very few degrees of separation between Daniel and Shakespeare in 94 and 95, and multiple paths connecting them. So I think the big takeaway, he says, is the identification of the manuscript as a possible Shakespeare source points toward a re-evaluation of the nature of the engagement between Daniel and Shakespeare through their works, and potentially a reconsideration of the politics of the works themselves. I think he kind of tags that on at the end, but I guess he's suggesting that since this seems to be through such political circles, and we have to presume that this is a political thing, because why else are these no-name broke guys writing all this stuff for all these rich people? It must be for getting paid for political reasons. And, maybe that's not the worst.
They can't be doing all this stuff all the time, and then, but here they are just sort of doing their artsy-fartsy stuff here on the side. It's
right.
Like, no. This is all integrated. And clearly also understanding, like, how much of that Roman writing sort of affects the body politic and yada, 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 and just,
Yep. And, like, to be fair, I got mixed feelings. I got super mixed feelings. Like, I do want us to make all these political readings, but I really don't want us to start fudging biographical assumptions and doing what I mentioned that that one essay was saying that Marlovian scholars have been doing for so long. And of course we already know Shakespearean scholars have been doing it for so long, but let's not continue doing it, and let's not build a whole nother wholesale narrative that, now we must know that Shakespeare and Samuel Daniel went to the pub all the time together. Like, and you can bet your bottom dollar you will get people starting to say that. They're gonna have to, so long as people like me and you and David Weiss and other people are out there on the rooftop shouting out Samuel Daniel's in Shakespeare. And, like, I think the only two options are to make some silly generalization assumption that, they must be buddies with each other, or it's to assume that they don't know each other, but this is all through a political network, and this isn't just about acquaintance. This is about, being mandated by your betters to do these things. money, for status, for going up in rank. So yeah, I do think that it is a political scheme, but I don't think it's these no-name guys coming out of the swamps of Stratford to get paid to write political stuff for the most politically brilliant-minded people of the era that have as good or better literary and educational upbringing as Stratford Man, or honestly any of these names that Matthew Brand Davies lists, John Hayward or George Chapman. I think we need like just a wholesale reevaluation of what we understand Elizabethan literature to be. If that stuff is getting written and published and heavily distributed, it's not just some random people organically like, oh yeah, I'm making art because this is how I could maybe make some change. We showed in the Marlowe kills Shakespeare, Shakespeare kills Marlowe video that they're not making much money. They're making so very little. And so maybe from that, we're going to start making the assumptions that, oh, these rich patrons are paying for these plays behind the scenes as well, and not just from the Henslow managerial thing. And,
Yeah.
And maybe that goes into Oxfordian scriptorum with the annuities reading and all that, but I want to say none of it is going far enough. That we have to, like, at some point, just assume that all the authors are suspect. Every author printed in the Elizabethan era is just suspect. And you need to look at this stylistically, biographically, politically, psychologically,
economically,
any angle you possibly can to try and piece it together, and then see what matches up with what's actually printed on the page. Because so far, what we've been doing is assuming most, if not all, the stuff printed on the page, on the title, by so-and-so, by William Shakespeare, for 400 years, most of us have been like, yeah, I think, yeah, oh, that's right. And then every now and then one pops up, and it's like, oh, that doesn't sound right. All right, take that one off, take that one off. And then something else doesn't sound right. Okay, take that one off. And then those two being taken off actually made something else problematic. And all right, take that off and put another name, but you put that name on it, made another thing problematic. And guys, the house of cards is falling here. And that's a good thing. We want this house of cards to fall. We're disintegrationists. We think that Shakespeare is largely a collaborative effort, not just Shakespeare. I think a lot of it is, but some of this collaboration can be great minds in the back room, or it can be political minds forcing other people to do it, or it can be a combination of both. It can be a vast network of people over several decades. That doesn't have to be crazy. We have so little documentation that, like, any documentation of that could have been destroyed, just like Shakespeare's documents didn't make it either. So, like, that's Occam's razor for you. Let's see. Any closing thoughts on this, Brady? Maybe on that note. Yeah.
It's just more of the same stuff, and I guess as far as that, I guess we're just kind of beating on poor Stratford here, but kind of doing these close readings between finding Samuel Daniel and Shakespeare and vice versa, and just. We've already shown maybe in the Shakespeare and Arcadia video, and just sort of like literal very passage references or homages to one another from Philip stuff and Shakespeare stuff, and just there's so much stuff to figure out, like who just like he's doing, actually properly dating about who's using what first, who's using what source first, who seems to be copying more than the other one.
Shout out to David for being like that, like meticulous about all the dating and like questioning, like, wait, this could have come before this, or this could have come before this, and this is what we have to go on. And even though we're giving him a little bit of crap for being saying likely this or probably that, like, that's all he has to go on, and that's his own opinion. And if we think he's wrong, let's go write an essay and show him that's probably not the case. Blah 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 blah. So I don't want to make it look like he's a coward because he won't put his name on something, or he's just making stuff up wholesale. No, like, he's trying to give an educated guess, and he is labeling it as such. That said, it is so much speculation. Maybe let's read a little bit of Daniel, and let's read a little bit of Shakespeare. This isn't even from the Civil Wars, This is from the Delia Sonnets. This is sonnet number 46. And that number may be special in Shakespearean numerology. 46 is where you get maybe Shakespeare's signature in the King James Bible in Psalm 46. If you count the 46th word, it's shake. If you count the 46th word in reverse from the end, it's spear. Shakespeare, or perhaps somebody else, like Marlowe, they were both 46 in the year 1610 when King James Bible was printed. So 46 is interesting, but Marlowe himself, his birth date is not totally certain, but his baptism's the 26th, and that happens sometimes 3 days after birth, so he could have been born the 23rd of February. 223, 2 times 23 is 46. Once again, they're born in 64, which is an inversion of 46. So 46 seems special. So Sonnet 46 of Samuel Daniel's Delia Sonnets. Let others sing of knights and paladins in aged accents and untimely words. Paint shadows in imaginary lines which well the reach of their high wits records. But I must sing of thee and of those fair eyes. Authentic shall my verse in time to come. When yet the unborn shall say, lo, where she lies, whose beauty made him speak that else was dumb. These are the arks, the trophies I erect, that fortify thy name against old age. And these thy sacred virtues must protect against the dark and time's consuming rage. Though the terror of my youth they shall discover, suffice they show I lived and was thy lover. Which, fascinating if you think Samuel Daniel, 'cause who knows who that's about and what that's about. But this sort of stylistic trait here that we have, where he's starting off with let us or let others do this thing and talk about stuff and just sing about stuff, and while they do that, it's, even though that should be the best thing ever, it's gonna feel like this waste of time to me. And so let others sing of knights and paladins. That's what poetry is about, you know. Think of Spenser, think of Chaucer, but Samuel Daniel here is like, he's like, no, I'm gonna write about my love, even though these knights and paladins such a way bigger, cooler thing. Well, if we go to Richard's famous monologue in Act 3, Scene 2, he says, let's talk of graves, of worms, and epitaphs. Make dust our paper, and with rainy eyes write sorrow on the bosom of the earth. So, instead of let others talk of something, he says, let us talk of these things. And instead of knights and paladins, he says graves, worms, and epitaphs. But in both cases, graves, worms, and epitaphs, that's things past, right? Knights and paladins, things past. Okay, so like we have the same kind of like construction, and
Epitaphs also kind of harkens to that sort of, like lofty ideals.
Monuments.
Yes.
Literally.
Very grandiose, very...
like we constantly get these talk of...
very heraldic, sort of
right. But these are the arcs, the trophies I erect. And so we get this, sense of monument or even tomb or great statue or something like that. And epitaph kind of brings that up in a different sense. Write sorrow on the bosom of the earth. Let's choose executors and talk of wills. So same exact linguistic syntactical structure there. Let us do this thing and talk of this thing. And yet not so, for what can we bequeath save our deposed bodies to the ground? There's that word deposed. Like, Daniel used that. That wasn't Shakespeare, by the way. Save our, not in the sonnet, but in the Civil War plays that we're recording. Save our deposed bodies to the ground. Our lands, our lives, and all our bowling brokes, and nothing can we call our own but death and that small model of the barren earth which serves as paste and cover to our bones. For God's sake, let us sit upon the ground and tell sad stories of the death of kings. So, we moved on from knights and paladins up to kings. For God's sake, but in this sense, in Daniel he says, let others do it while I talk of my love. In this one, Richard's almost saying this ironically, like, let's talk of it, but there's no fucking point. you might as well let others do it. And so, like, in both senses, it's saying, let's talk of all these things that are supposed to be so important and engaging and take our mind and sensibilities to some place that we love. Mm-hmm. Who loves stories of kings and knights and paladins? I'll let you answer that question after the video. No, go ahead and answer it now.
Horse lover, man.
Yeah. don't give Oxfordians that nickname. Don't. Yeah, they're gonna start calling us the BoJack Horseman, guys.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, how some have been deposed, some slain in war, some haunted by ghosts, they have deposed. Some poisoned by their wives, some sleeping killed, all murdered. For within that hollow crown that rounds the mortal temples of a king keeps death his courts, and there the antic sits, scoffing his state and grinning at his pomp, allowing him a breath, a little seen to monarch eyes, be feared and kill with looks, infusing him with self and vain conceit, as if this flesh which walls about our life were brass impregnable, and humoured thus. Come at the last, and with a little pen bores through his castle wall, and farewell, king. Cover your heads, and mock not flesh and blood with solemn reverence. Throw away respect. There's that word respect again. That's Daniel's word, respective. That wasn't Shakespeare's. Also, Daniel said bloody accents, and we have not flesh and blood with solemn reverence. Those are all Daniel's words first. Tradition, form, and ceremonious duty. For you have but mistook me all this while. I live with bread like you, feel want, taste grief, need friends, subjected thus. How can you say to me, I am a king? And of course, Richard II also brings to mind kingdom, a cottage, or a grave. There's the line in here where he speaks of that. But I don't know, Daniel himself kind of has that vibe when you read Daniel. And so there's maybe some commonplace elements to this, but at the end of the day, I want to say that this sonnet especially, Sonnet 46, and it also reminds me a lot of Shakespeare's Sonnet 106, when in the Chronicles of Wasted Time. Those are all very Richard II type things. I want to say it like that. Like, at some point, Samuel Daniel just sounds like Richard II. Maybe albeit Richard II with a patron and not getting to speak his full free mind, or with the gaze or semblance of a patron and not speak his full free mind, but like Richard II is just uncensored Daniel, unsobered Daniel. Richard II is drunk Daniel, you know, like if we want to say it like that. I'm being somewhat facetious. But yeah, like more than anything in Shakespeare, Richard II feels like Daniel. And there's other stuff too. Is Daniel always in Shakespeare? Well, I guess we haven't looked at it hard enough to think about that. Is Daniel one of the main hands in Shakespeare? Or is this just influence? I don't know. I guess we, not just Brady and I, but the whole community, have not gotten to look at this hard enough to think about that. David Weiss, like I said, is doing the Lord's work, but he's not allowed to ask those questions. So Brady and I, you Baconians, you Florians, you Oxfordians, all the buzz names are here. Right? This is Cecil, Southampton, Florio, Greville, Mountjoy. We the whole crowd's here, guys. Let's start trying to work Daniel into our idea of what's happening with Shakespeare in the mid-90s. Because I think part of the problem is that a lot of Florians are keyed in on the folio printing. A lot of Oxfordians are keyed in on the Oxford's Players' Days, when Oxford would have been penning plays. Fisher's Folly stuff in the 80s. We don't have, and you know, you Baconians are definitely looking at a lot of different times, but even Baconians, like, I feel like it's very much like the Florians as well. It focuses on the putting together of the folio, 1616 and after, when Bacon has all that free time. I don't feel like anybody other than Marlovians are looking real hard into the mid-90s, and Marlovians can look as hard as they want, but like, there's not a lot to go on other than stylistic stuff. And so maybe some of our other theories might be able to do some stuff with that era. That's it. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned for more in the future.
And I have one last little thing just to close it off because of this Delia 46 sonnet. It's something we found out last year after I guess we had done the True Shakespeare video with Samuel Daniel. But I play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. I play weekly Dungeons and Dragons.
Throw an ad for yourself.
But yeah, I even have my Shadow Dark book here. If you watched the video earlier, just a shout out. But paladin is a word that definitely comes up a lot in game terminology. It just kind of has this sort of combat-y sort of like, I don't know.
Its own like character type.
Yeah, it's an archetype that's well known within this sort of like arena here. But I was playing D&D a lot, and I even was thinking about the word paladin. I was like, oh, what's the etymology of that? And so last year I looked it up, and it comes from like literally like palatine, like or someone who was like a palace guard essentially, harkening back to whatever old language I can't. Maybe it's old Latin or something along those lines. I forget. But yeah, that's what it literally means. And so kind of go on a little bit, and then you and I, we talk about this sonnet. This is one of the sonnets that we also had on that trivia that we did at the Texas Ren Fair too, right? Remember? So this was already on my mind, but then at some point I was like, wait a second. Wait, when does this word paladin enter the English language? And yeah, apparently this sonnet is the first attestation of the word paladin being used in English by Samuel Daniel. And I was like, oh, snap. And like, dude, okay, that's kind of crazy that I had kind of researched it separately or whatever, right?
And this is something that, like, I also kind of want to call into question. Like, I know Florio and Shakespeare and Chaucer have those big statistics that they got the big, 1,000 words in our language, but, like, I kind of just want a list of the other guys.
Yeah, like, so true.
I was arguing with Michael Reed the other day about, Sydney, and he was suggesting Sydney didn't coin words, which is wrong. Sydney coins tons of words, but to his defense, we don't have that Wikipedia entry.
There's no handy compendium of all that information.
We don't get you Google Sydney new coined words and get this giant list like you do with Shakespeare. And now, since there are a bunch of Florio people online, we get those kind of things with Florio too. We don't have that with Sydney, and so that's maybe something I could do on my own free time. But like that requires a lot of thought and attention. I need like college tuition level Patreon amount donations to like to be able to do that. So but yeah, that said, like Samuel Daniel, I'm sure there's plenty of other words like paladin, cool words that it's not just Shakespeare, it's not just Florio, guys.
Yes.
It's a bunch of people. It's just Shakespeare has the most stuff published and printed, and Florio made dictionaries. So, like, those are going to have more words. That said, let's see. Any other final thoughts?
No, I think this is a good spot to close it out. And,
okay.
I think we covered a lot of good ground here. And just, showing the importance of Daniel in the Shakespeare question. And then even further, hairier weeds to have to chop down if you're actually in the SAQ proper, right?
Yeah.
A lot of good food for thought. A lot of good... coming back around to hitting some of the points we made on earlier videos too, not just the True Shakespeare video, but kind of
it's coming back.
Yes,
that's hopefully a good thing.
All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for tuning in tonight, and check down all the links below for the Patreon and Venmo descriptions if you feel so inclined. And otherwise, we will see you next time. Nullius in verba.